They thought you'd never leave, that your kindness was infinite, that your silence meant surrender. But they were wrong. What they didn't see is that in your silence, a quiet revolution was already unfolding. When an empath, someone who loved fully, forgave endlessly, and fought to preserve connection, finally chooses emotional detachment, it's not a sign of weakness. It's the declaration of an awakened soul. A soul that no longer reacts, no longer explains, no longer allows manipulation to take root. And that's when the narcissist starts to pay the price. In today's video, we're uncovering the deep truth behind why an empath's silence is the narcissist's greatest threat. No yelling, no drama. Just a powerful awakening that dismantles every illusion of control the narcissist once clung to. If you've ever felt used, manipulated, or lost in a toxic relationship, this message is for you. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell right now, because what you're about to hear may be the turning point in your healing journey. And don't go anywhere, the most powerful part is yet to come. They thought you were naive, but you knew. You felt everything before it was said. You could read the energy in a room before anyone spoke. You forgave not because you forgot, but because you had hope. You stayed not because you were weak, but because you believed in something better. That's what makes you an empath, someone who feels deeply and loves fully. But that same depth is exactly what makes you the perfect target in the eyes of a narcissist. Empaths are sensitive souls. They live from the heart, love without holding back, and carry an unshakable faith that people can change, that every wound can be healed. They strive to connect, even with those who hurt them. And that's exactly where the narcissist sneaks in. The narcissist, with their empty core and insatiable need for control, sees in the empath a perfect source of emotional fuel. They don't want to love you. They want to be loved by you endlessly, unconditionally, without having to reciprocate with honesty or integrity. They don't love who you are. They love how you love them. Because the empath operates from emotion, they fall into the trap easily. The love bombing, the idealization, the whirlwind connection, it all feels so real. But it's not love. It's strategy. The narcissist is crafting a fantasy to hook you, to make you believe this is fate. But soon that fantasy morphs into control through silence, blame, confusion, and subtle emotional sabotage. They make you question yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Am I overreacting? Maybe I just need to be more patient. And slowly you begin to lower your standards, silence your boundaries, and tolerate things you once said you'd never accept. Empaths have a deep desire to heal not just themselves, but everyone around them. They don't give up easily. They try to understand, to rationalize, to make excuses for the narcissist's cruelty, blaming it on childhood wounds or emotional trauma. But here's what they don't yet realize: narcissists don't want healing. They want control. And the more the empath loves, the deeper they fall into the manipulation. They don't realize they're fighting alone in a one-sided war. They think if they just love harder, wait longer, forgive deeper, it will all change. But the truth is, love can't heal someone who refuses to be healed. That's the blind spot of the empath, and it's the very doorway the narcissist walks through to hijack their emotional world. All the narcissist truly needs is your reaction. Your confusion, your pain, your tears, that's their fuel. They don't crave love. They crave emotional dominance. And your kindness, your patience, your sensitivity, the very things that make you beautiful, become the tools they twist to control you. But then, something changes. After all the manipulation, all the heartbreak, all the silent suffering, the empath stops reacting. They stop explaining. They stop needing to be understood. They don't cry, plead, or rage anymore. They just go quiet. And that's when everything starts to shift. They don't see it right away. The narcissist doesn't notice that subtle but pivotal moment when the light in your eyes no longer holds hope, when your voice no longer trembles with emotion, when you begin to observe instead of react. The narcissist, used to being the center of your emotional world, isn't prepared for this. They don't realize that silence isn't surrender. It's the beginning of withdrawal. The empath doesn't disappear overnight. They withdraw first internally, then outwardly. They still listen, but they no longer believe. They still smile, but the connection is gone. They're still physically present, but the soul that once fought to keep the love alive has quietly stepped back. And that's what leaves the narcissist confused and disoriented. At first, the narcissist goes back to the usual tricks: emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, even playing the victim. They push all the old emotional buttons that once worked so well. But this time, nothing happens. You don't cry, you don't argue, you don't explain, you're just quiet. And that's when the narcissist begins to feel the one thing they fear most: loss of control. To them, you were never a whole person, you were a source. A supplier of emotions, a mirror for their ego. They didn't love you, they fed off your energy. So when you stop reacting, they lose their supply. And without that supply, the narcissist begins to unravel. But don't mistake it, they're not devastated because they lost you. They're devastated because they lost their ability to manipulate you. What they mourn is not love, it's power. And once you begin to see this for what it is, you have no reason left to stay. Empaths are masters of patience and unconditional love, but patience doesn't last forever. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and love, if not met with respect, quietly dies. When the empath realizes they've been giving too much and receiving too little, that they're losing themselves trying to someone who doesn't want to be saved, that's the moment the truth breaks through. Not with an explosion, but like a quiet door closing. No more nights spent asking, what did I do wrong? No more trying to explain your feelings, only to be twisted into confusion. No more one-sided conversations with someone who was never truly listening. Instead, there's clarity. This isn't love. This is depletion. I don't need to fight to be loved. I need to love without being hurt. When you walk away not in anger but in energy, not with revenge but with indifference, when you choose peace over chaos, stillness over shouting, that's when the narcissist is left alone with the void they used to fill with illusions. And in that void, they no longer see you, only themselves. You don't need to scream. You don't need revenge. All the empath has to do is stop reacting. And just like that, all the power the narcissist thought they had begins to fall apart. This is what narcissists will never understand. The empath's silence isn't emptiness, it's a boundary. A boundary that's invisible yet unshakable. No amount of threats, guilt, or manipulation can break through it. The empath no longer needs to explain themselves. They no longer feel the urge to justify their emotions. They're no longer playing the narcissist's game because they've finally stepped out of the emotional maze the narcissist built. To the narcissist, every argument, every tear, every emotional outburst was proof of control. Whether positive or negative, your reaction was the fuel. As long as you responded, they felt powerful. But when you go still, they panic. Emotional detachment doesn't come from coldness, it comes from clarity. From the moment you realize that it's not that you weren't enough, it's that they were never real. And you choose to walk away, not because you no longer love, but because you finally love yourself more. This silence destabilizes the narcissist. They try everything, the victim role, fake apologies, hovering tactics. But you don't respond. Not because you're cruel, but because you're awake. They used to manipulate you with inconsistency, loving one moment, withdrawing the next, praising then criticizing. They created an emotional roller coaster that made you think, if I just try a little harder, this will work. But now, you see the truth, this was never love. This was emotional control disguised as affection. So you stop fighting, you simply stop participating. And this is the moment when the power dynamic flips. The empath stops seeking apologies, stops chasing closure from someone who was never truly present, stops explaining pain to someone who weaponized it. Instead, they turn quietly, with dignity, with peace. And guess what happens? The narcissist collapses, not because you screamed at them, but because you no longer need them. And nothing wounds a manipulator more than becoming irrelevant. They are no longer reflected through you, no longer mirrored, no longer admired. The emotional mirror they once relied on now shattered. And in those broken shards, they only see the emptiness they've always tried to avoid. Emotional detachment isn't loud, dramatic, or declared. It's silent but destructive in the most liberating way. Because it doesn't just end the relationship, it ends the manipulation. You don't need to shout to reclaim your freedom. You just need to stop reacting. And in that non-reaction, you've already won. When you stop reacting, the narcissist doesn't just lose supply, they lose their entire identity structure. Because in their world, self-worth doesn't come from within. It comes from controlling someone else's emotions. And once you step out of that dynamic, they no longer know who they are. This collapse doesn't happen quietly. In fact, it explodes. When power slips through their hands, the narcissist reacts with survival mode intensity. They can't accept the reality that you've escaped. They can't bear the truth that you've chosen yourself over them. So they'll do everything they can to pull you back in. First comes the hovering, their attempt to suck you back into the old cycle. Suddenly they're kind, gentle, even enlightened. They send casual messages. They bring up the good times. They may even apologize, but not to change, only to test whether you'll respond. And when you don't, they shift into attack mode. They lash out. They insult. They start rumors. They'll do anything to provoke you because they need you to feel hurt. They need you to react. One message, one explanation, one tear, anything to prove they still have power over you. But you're not the same anymore. You no longer need to defend yourself. You no longer seek to be understood. You no longer hope they'll finally see your worth. You've learned something far more important. Not reacting is not cruelty, it's protection. And that calms silence. It drives them mad. The narcissist may play the victim. How could you do this to me? As if they hadn't spent months, even years, gaslighting, manipulating, and distorting your reality. They may shift blame, rewrite the story, and paint you as the cold, uncaring one just to salvage their fragile ego. These are not expressions of love. They're desperate attempts to preserve the illusion of control. But you've unplugged the whole system. When you're no longer the mirror that reflects their superiority, they're left only with themselves. And what they see isn't greatness, it's emptiness. There's no longer your gaze admiring them. No longer your heart waiting for change. No longer unconditional love. All that remains is the truth they've been running from their entire life. They were never loved for who they are, only fueled by your reactions. And when those reactions disappear, the illusion collapses. Narcissists don't know what to do with silence. They don't know how to exist unless they're being centered. They can't stand being irrelevant. So they flail, they lie, they perform, they provoke. But none of it matters anymore, because you're no longer watching. You've left the stage. You've turned off the lights. You've walked out without needing a final goodbye. And in that quiet indifference, you take back every ounce of power they thought they had stolen. There's one thing the narcissist never saw coming, that the empath doesn't just know how to love, they know how to recover. They don't just give, they know when to let go. And when the empath lets go, it's not impulsive. It's a deep, intentional, irreversible decision. You no longer search for closure from someone too emotionally immature to offer it. You no longer cling to what once had meaning. Instead, you begin returning to yourself. And it's there within that your true rise begins. You start placing your hand over your heart and asking, is this really for me? Is this emotion rooted in love or in pain? You no longer act from the fear of abandonment, but from the desire to live in truth. This rising isn't loud. It isn't revenge. It's a quiet healing, and from that place, you begin to walk forward with powerful stillness. You start setting boundaries not because you hate, but because you value. You no longer need to yell to be heard. You simply stop answering calls that come from your wounds. And day by day, you begin to return to yourself, not the broken version, but the stronger, wiser, fuller version of who you were always meant to be. You realize you were never too sensitive. You didn't love wrong. You weren't asking for too much. You simply gave your heart to someone who didn't know how to hold it. Now that heart beats for you. You walk away without looking back, without needing anyone's understanding, without needing an apology, without needing anyone to confirm your worth, because you've confirmed it within yourself. The narcissist will be confused. They won't understand your indifference. They'll say, you've changed. And they're right. You have changed. You no longer use love as a reason to tolerate abuse. You no longer let kindness be mistaken for weakness. You no longer sacrifice your peace to maintain a broken bond. You choose silence not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough not to prove anything anymore. You choose solitude not because you're lonely, but because you'd rather be at peace alone than in chaos with someone else. The empath's rise isn't about flipping the power dynamic. It's a quiet declaration. I've chosen myself, and I don't need you to be whole. And that is the moment the narcissist loses everything, not because you destroyed them, but because you stopped allowing them to touch your soul. You don't have to destroy anyone to reclaim your power. You just have to stop giving them access to the most sacred parts of you. The truth is, the narcissist doesn't lose because you fought back. They lose because you stopped reacting, because you walked away from the cycle they thought you'd never leave. You didn't return pain with hatred, you responded with growth. You didn't win by gaining control, you won by taking back your soul. That is the ultimate victory. And that is the price the narcissist pays, not through drama, but through your quiet absence. If you're somewhere on this path, if the wounds are still fresh, if you're still finding your way out of the dark, remember this: you're not alone. You're not alone, you're not invisible, and you are not weak. You are a survivor. And now you are learning how to live free. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share your story in the comments below. Because when we speak, we don't just heal ourselves, we help each other step into the light.